All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Simon Howard, and I'll be talking about my final project, which is developing a GIS-based model for the prediction of prehistoric archaeological sites in San Diego, California. So the goals for this project are to kind of create a model that can be used to try and find unknown archaeological sites. And with this model, I will be testing it against a set of known archaeological sites within the county. And this is going to help determine how this model applies to future archaeology within the county. So San Diego, California is the southwesternmost county in the United States. It's right next to Mexico. And it's pretty diverse. You have a very urban area towards the coast, and then kind of a less populated area inland towards the desert area, as you can see in the map here. So some of the potential reasons why a model like this might be useful is because you have urban sprawl, particularly on the coast, which could cause the destruction of archaeological sites. Also, another couple issues, natural disasters. We do have a fair amount of wildfires every year, as well as earthquakes, and then sea level rise is also a potential issue when it comes to losing archaeological sites. Additionally, other things such as recreational hiking, farming, or river damming could also lead to the destruction of archaeological sites. So when it comes to creating a model for archaeology, there's kind of a paradigm between deductive methods and inductive methods. Deductive methods are kind of considered the golden standard when it comes to using these models to try and explain people's past and people's behavior in the past. Likewise, inductive methodologies have kind of been targeted by academic archaeologists as kind of not all that useful when it comes to explaining people's actions in the past. Really, the criticism for inductive methods is that they really only explain the data that they're used to build them. So how this works is, for deductive methods, usually you'll come up with a hypothesis about people's behavior in the past, and you use that hypothesis to build a model, and this model would then be used to test that hypothesis. If you can explain the hypothesis with the model, then obviously you might be able to use that model to explain why people did these in the past. With inductive methods, you make an observation about the data set, and then you use that observation to kind of extrapolate wider uses for that data set. And the method that I've used is kind of more of an inductive methodology, and it might not be perfect, but there are some definite uses for inductive methods. For example, CRM archaeology, which is cultural resource management, that's kind of more focused on identifying sites and preserving or recording them before they're destroyed, usually in some kind of construction or governmental type of activity. So, sometimes archaeological sites are destroyed, and it's unfortunate, but it does happen. And so if we can find them before they're destroyed, there's definitely a use for that. And so using these models allows us to, so another tool that we can use to try and find these sites before they're destroyed. So jumping in some of the data sets that I used, obviously a DEM, I downloaded this from the USGS. It's a 1/3 arcsecond resolution, so pretty high definition, high resolution image, and I use this data set for a lot of the other data that is derived for this analysis, such as the slope data. So this was used really because people typically, sites are located on flatter areas of the ground. Also, through time and through erosion, if there are sites located on higher slope areas, they're going to erode and be deposited on a flatter area. So you're more likely to find sites on flatter terrain in general. River data, I take this from the San Diego County GIS depository. It's a polyline data set, and from that I created an occlusion distance raster, basically showing how far away areas are from a source of a river. I did not use lakes because there's been a lot of, I guess, man-made changes to the lakes over the last, in the modern era, I guess. Damming has caused a lot of the lakes to kind of be unnatural, so they wouldn't really represent previous or prehistoric conditions. And that brings us into temperature data. So this is a 30-year average from 1970 to 2000. showing the average annual conditions for San Diego. It's a 30 arc-second resolution, so it's a little high, lower resolution. However, I think it's sufficient for what we're doing since we're looking at kind of a broader scale map. And same thing with the rainfall data. It's from the same site, and the environmental data sets, the temperature and rainfall data, kind of useful to show just a variety of conditions within San Diego. As you can see here, the eastern portion of the county is very dry and desert-like, and then the mountainous conditions in the center of the county are quite wet. You know, and rainfall is useful, obviously, as a source of drinking water, but also maybe a negative impact if too much rainfall is occurring. Finally, for the environmental data, we have a viewshed analysis. So this data was taken with the DEM, and then also observation points from all the archaeological sites that I was able to capture. And this is just showing you what can be seen from each of the different archaeological sites. Typically, archaeological sites are going to be located within viewing distance of other archaeological sites. So that's kind of the method, the rationale behind using this in this analysis. And then this is the archaeological data that I was able to capture. This data was kind of difficult to get to, but I did manage to find about 111 sites. And I did this through kind of reading other archaeological research articles and publications and georeferencing all these different sites. And I tried to be as unbiased as possible, just kind of accept any site that had decent kind of a map of where it was located. And each of these sites, I then use the extract multi-values to points tool in ArcGIS to kind of give all those sites all the environmental data. And from that, I could derive kind of minimum, maximum, and average values to try and determine the parameters that I was going to use for my model. And as you can see on the bottom left side of the screen, those are the variables and the parameters that I decided for this model. Okay, this is a summary of the methodology beyond this point. So as I said, once I had the parameters for each of the different variables, I used a Boolean type analysis and raster calculator to create kind of like a binary raster image for each of the different variables where the parameter was met and where the parameter was not met. And then from this data set, I used the calculation here to make the final model. And it's a simple addition. All 6 rasters are just added together in raster calculator, and that allowed me to create the final model. And this is the result. Here we see the different areas with the different categories of the model that I created. So from very high on the bottom right of the screen, all the way up to very low probability on the top left of that image. Most of the very high and high areas are along the western side of San Diego, along the coast. And then as you get less and less likely, you kind of go more inland towards the higher elevation and the desert areas in the east of the county, which makes sense if you think about the data sets. Obviously, the western side is going to be more temperate in terms of the climate conditions, while also being flat and has a good source of rivers. And then this is the final kind of model showing you everything in detail from very high to very low. And this is the model showing you the sites superimposed on top of it, kind of showing you how the model relates to known archaeological sites. As you can see, it fits pretty good for the most part, especially along the coast. But as you kind of go inland, you know, maybe there's some issues with the sites along the eastern side of the county. And this is where all the different sites are distributed along the pie chart here. And as you can see, a very high proportion of sites are located in very high or high probability of finding archaeology, approximately 60%. So this all kind of leads me to the conclusion that this model is very useful, and it has potential to be used within San Diego to kind of help us determine where archaeology might be located, particularly for CRM archaeology, when it comes to preventing the loss of archaeological sites within San Diego. Also, I think this is a pretty repeatable type model. You could pretty much do this anywhere in the world that has similar data sets, government funded type environmental data. So this is definitely a repeatable type study, which I think does have application anywhere. And that's all I've got. Do I have any questions?